just going to wait for Camille to jump on with us. I'm so super excited to be having this conversation. While we're waiting for Camille to jump on, I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. Camille Djokoto is a Toronto-based registered psychotherapist and somatic movement specialist providing trauma-informed, socially conscious therapy. Her practice is informed by anti-oppressive and anti-racist, queer, and feminist values. Camille's approach is relational, expressional, and embodied, inspired by somatic training of 30 plus years of dance. Okay, so Camille is just really actually a rock star. If you haven't yet, we have a blog post with a Q&A with Camille that you should definitely check out. In the Q&A, it answers just some questions that you might be having around therapy and hi Camille and understandings of therapy. Hi, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. This is our first time face to face. I'm so super excited for it.
I've seen you on Instagram, but yeah, it's nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you as well. I just did a little mini introduction of your bio and read it and was like, oh wow, you're just a rock star and like all the things. I feel so honored to get to have a conversation with you today.
Thank you.
I would love to hear more about your practice. So I did a small mini intro while I was waiting for you to jump on the call. And it talked a little bit about your practice being informed by anti-oppressive practice and anti-racist practices, and that you're also trauma-informed. So I'm curious to hear more about maybe your journey. Like, how did you get into therapy, and what has your practice looked like, and what are some of your specialties?
Yeah. So it was really interesting. It was kind of a move into therapy, really just because of my healing journey. So, you know, it was interesting, but I think my life shaped it. I think I started going to therapy. I started going to therapy really early on, and it was really helpful. And at the same time, there was something also that was happening. I was a dancer and a mover, and I started to notice that there was something about being in my body and how I could notice that and how it made me feel. And the two of them just started to organically sync up, and I followed my interests, and it led me to somatics. And somatics is all kind of about that. It's about your first person lived experience in your body in relationship to the world. So everything that you're sensing and feeling in relationship to with yourself, with the other, with the environment, and of course all of the, you know, the systems and structures and institutions that we live within. And one of the things that I noticed really happening for me was that a lot of the time the therapy that I could access, you know, you're out there hustling, doing what you got to do, and you're, you know, taking advantage of whatever systems are available to you. I was finding that there wasn't enough Black and brown bodies who knew my story, who could understand. And sometimes I would feel pathologized, I would feel unseen, I would feel missed, I would feel unheard. And that was really tough. So, but it informed me, it helped shape me in terms of identifying what it is that I needed. And so that's kind of how I put my practice together, was kind of, you know, so that I could offer people what I needed for myself. So I needed somebody who had a perspective and understanding of social justice, and that was going to be the lens that they would practice their therapy through. And I needed to have my body involved. There was something in that journey that I understood that the stress, I could feel it symptomatically in my body. And when the body was included and it was a part of the healing process, it was very, I responded really well to that. So yeah, that was kind of how it all kind of came together.
Thank you. I'm curious, I feel like you touched on it a little bit, but what are some ways that we can really address experiences of stigma around healing and therapy within the Black community specifically?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I think that there are many ways. I think that, what's really interesting about that question is that immediately I start thinking about, of course, intergenerational trauma.
Yeah.
And of course, it's how, oppressive systems have shaped all of our journeys and our histories. And the lens of oppression, of course, is a lens that is from a very specific viewpoint.
Yeah.
It's the dominant in group. And because of that, I think it really, it shaped the lens of how we're all supposed to live our lives. But when it comes to understanding that we are supposed to be devalued, that becomes an issue. And that's a part of the system that then we become indoctrinated into and cultured into and conditioned to think like.
Yeah.
And then that starts to trickle down within our own communities, cultures, and our families. And so there's something about the perspective of that it's not okay, that there's something wrong with us, that we're weak. All of these things, again, are very diminishing. And so I do think that that is a part of the stigma. It's a part of how, the process of conditioning too, which I think is structural.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that really plays a large part in it. So I think when we do, address stigma, we're really talking about intergenerational healing as well.
So just so I can understand a little better, is it the idea that as we start to address some of what has happened intergenerationally within our own families and our own communities, and address some of the ideas around the value, worth, that we're able to address some of where the stigma is coming from?
Well, I think what I mean by that, thank you for clarifying. What I mean by that is I think it's helpful for us who are wanting to seek therapy, for us who feel, within our own cultures or communities that it's not okay, that we might be able to have some support there to know that, no, this is how we're conditioned to think about this. Yeah. I think in general, as a whole, of course, this culture is towards more kind of an ableist lens, and that's including all of our health, including mental health. So that's, people who are able to do things one way and who look a certain way are the ones who are most valued. And so I think that's a part of the conditioning that applies to the stigma that affects all of us living in this world, for sure. And so I do think that a lot of that has to do with some of the our awareness about that, about the decolonizing practice and mindset that we need. To raise some awareness about and to be talking about within our communities. Because again, I think that mindset as a whole, it seeks to diminish. Yeah. That's kind of the whole point. And so that if we don't have the awareness that that's kind of the point and that's what it seeks to do, and we do internalize that, then we do start to feel bad. So it's certainly not our fault, and it's not something that, that anybody, should feel shame about, but we do. We do, because these are the systems we live within. And so I do think that, more awareness, more talking about it, sharing our experiences, so that we know that we're not alone.
And I'm curious, if someone is wanting to support maybe a family member or a friend on that journey, what are some tips? I'm just thinking about times in my own life, talking to friends and being like, maybe like, just suggesting therapy as an option, and how to even have that. I know that it's been hard for me to have that conversation with folks. I know it's probably been hard for other people to have that conversation with me. So I'm wondering, like, what are some things that we can do to maybe normalize or like have these conversations with each other in a way that feels, I don't know if comfortable is the right word, but like, I don't even know, where do we even start with a conversation like that when because I feel like sometimes we, particularly I'll speak as a Black woman, I feel like in our friendships and connections, like we become really emotional support folks for each other. And sometimes I felt like I didn't have the tools to support folks in terms of where they were at and not necessarily knowing what to offer up as an option. And I'm just wondering, like, how do we start to embark on some of those dialogues within our connections and our friendships?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, that's a great question, and I think there are many ways that that can be answered. I think that you're right. I think that that is a part of, you know, being that we have tight-knit groups and that we are support for one another, which is fantastic. It can be that that may seem like the only shape or form, and knowing that we can widen our circle may not feel like an option.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do think the normalization of that is really important, to be able to consider something new. I think for anybody, change,
Mm-hmm.
that can be a little bit scary.
Mm-hmm.
And to be seen by somebody else might be
Mm-hmm.
vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think having access to other, you know, people of color, other Black folks, is really important in terms of to have other resources that people might feel comfortable with that you can suggest. I do think those conversations, you know, we just need to know that it's completely normal and human. There might be shame present, there might be discomfort present, and that's okay. It's not an indication that anything's wrong, but that, you know, that's just a part of the process. And I think once we take out judgment and encourage each other, you know, with love and holding that can be very helpful with one another. Yeah.
And I'm trying to think of how to phrase this question. I guess I'm thinking about just the journey of going to therapy, and I feel like sometimes having that initial conversation with a friend is the first part of the journey, and I think then it's one trying to come to terms with it for themselves. And I'm just curious, like, what are some of the signs, or what are some things that a person can look at within their own self and their own life to think about if it's maybe the choice that makes sense for them of where they're at right now?
Right, right. So, great question again, and I do think that those are about some of the signs, you know, I was writing a little bit about that in the blog post, and I think we can really feel that and sense that and see that in somebody else when we know that they're unwell. And I think a lot of that shows up as it is surrounding connection. I think that when you can tell people are pulling away and disconnecting, when you feel like you're pulling away and disconnecting. So that could look like isolation. Really, that can look like, you know, seeing somebody in their overwhelmed state of their feelings or disconnecting. So that may look like complete, you know, not wanting to be present, not wanting to be with people. So there's this thing, you know, the stress responses, you know, which, you know, you might have heard of, so fight, flight, or freeze, and there are a couple others that people refer to. So that can show up. So overwhelming emotions, so, you know, anxiety to the degree of panic, or anger and irritation and rage, so mood swings, or even if it goes towards the underwhelming of people disconnecting to a point of collapsed, more depressive state, that's bringing them out of contact, or an inability to stay in contact with somebody else. So there's so many signs, you know, that we can look for, unusual habits that people, you know, if we know them very well and we see that show up, or we know ourselves and we start, you know, engaging in really unusual patterns of behavior.
Thank you for that. I'm curious as to if someone does decide that is the next step for them, are there any questions that one should ask? Like, what maybe if they're contacting a therapist for the first time, is there anything that they should like? How does one go about doing that? Like, is there something to say or not say? Is there things to ask or not ask for those initial first contact moments?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important that, you know, sometimes if we're reaching out and we've never done this before, like you said, we may not know, but we also may know what we want, and there are different modalities in terms of, so different ways of practicing.
Mm-hmm.
And so you may have an idea already. So, you know, making sure that you're aligning yourself with that. But in general, I think it's really important that, you know, you can ask somebody in terms of what their education is. I think that people, you know, should be free with that information, would usually have that posted. And if somebody is unable to articulate that or tell you, you know, how they've trained or what they study, then that might be a red flag. If it's important for you that there be a licensing body, or that they be a part of a college that's registered, then you should be able to look that up. There will be a license number that you can ask for, that they should be able to provide you with. And also their approach, hearing what they have to say in terms of how they would approach, you know, what their therapy style is like, in relation to whatever you're presenting as your issues, to feel if it's a match. And also your intuition, you know, because you know yourself, and you know, sometimes it could be, you know, a good match elsewhere, but personality it might not match too. Yeah, I think that's important. And I also think that, you know, they're practicing in a way that aligns with your values, and that you feel that that's going to be supportive for your lived experience and who you are in this moment. Again, so maybe asking, you know, what their lens is in terms of their approach as well. What types of values or, you know, perspectives they're practicing from. I think it's important that, you know, people are also practicing from a trauma-informed lens, but a healing approach as well, and a person-centered approach. That means it's going to be crafted to what your specific needs are, as opposed to a methodology that's just going to be put on top of you, you know? So I think that's important. And also somebody who you feel you can trust. I think that's important. And, you know, standards of practice that will be covered underneath, you know, governing bodies, but that should be a part of, you know, any type of therapeutic process, is confidentiality and security. So that should be addressed. But also consent, and the fact that consent is a living thing that's ongoing. It's not a one-time check-in, because, you know, so that'll be important to hear those types of things. Just to start off with, just off the top of my head, I think that would be a good place to start.
Are consultations customary for folks who are seeing someone for the first time? Is there like a first, I don't know, like phone call or something that would usually happen?
Yeah, I think that that's fairly customary, and that people understand that that would be important, especially, you know, well, I think most everybody that I've seen. And I'll also offer that to people myself, just because I think it's important that, you're able to give somebody the opportunity to really get a felt sense if this is a match. Because also it's going to be their time, and it's going to be their money. You know, so I think that that's important, you know, for people to be able to ask for if it's not already kind of put out there for them.
And I guess I'm just curious if it's customary to prioritize things like maybe gender or race when looking for a therapist. I know I've had experiences of therapists telling me that it doesn't really matter, that like race doesn't really matter in therapy. And I know for me that was a challenging thing to hear. So I'm just wondering, is it customary for people to consider that? Is that just not something that is often considered in these dialogues?
I think it is considered, and I think it's appropriate for people to consider those things that will make them feel comfortable. In general, that would be nice if those things didn't matter. But again, not everybody may have the type of sensitivity to be able to really see you in your lived experience. And so I think that people should feel empowered to, again, make choices that align with, you know, their values, and being able to feel like they'll be seen in their lived experience, how they're going through life in their bodies. I think that's really important. So Yeah, therapists are trained to be able to deal with diverse populations.
Yeah.
However, we are human and we all have biases. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that it's important for people to feel empowered that they can, use their intuitive sense and,
Mm-hmm.
prioritize
Mm-hmm.
what's important for them and how they would
Mm-hmm.
like to be seen. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. And if someone isn't ready yet, if they're not ready to seek therapy, but they're wanting to start some type of healing or wellness journey at home, do you have any tips for them? Anything that they can start doing on their own in the meantime or interim before seeking help from a professional?
Yeah. You know, again, when it comes back to that sense of connection, how we feel connected in the world or how we don't, I think it's
Mm-hmm.
important that we're all able to receive that, because that's support and we all deserve
Mm-hmm.
that. So if we're gonna, look at it from that perspective, then
Mm-hmm.
what kind of support do I need that will help me stay in connection,
Mm-hmm.
build a relationship with myself, have a
Mm-hmm.
relationship with others around me, my intimate relationships, my friends, my community, but also with
Mm-hmm.
nature. So,
Mm-hmm.
there are very specific practical things that I could say, like, working on being able to identify your emotions. That's
Mm-hmm.
important, how you're feeling, being able to acknowledge that.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to then engage some resourcing and tools to be able to help support yourself when you feel overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and those resources, though, I think that if you're interested in starting this as a kind of a unique self uh, exploration, I
Mm-hmm.
think you can help yourself out with books. Are a
Mm-hmm.
great way, going down to the library, seeing sometimes there are great workbooks that help with self-reflective journeys for people.
Mm-hmm.
Also reading about other people's stories. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
now that we're in this age where we have access to being able to hear that,
Mm-hmm.
find folks, online that are going through our journeys, that are writing blog posts or who are
Mm-hmm.
talking about it. It might be important to see your experience or a similar experience be reflected back to you,
Yeah.
and maybe talking, sharing about their journeys and what they went through. So
Mm-hmm.
that's important. And I think that, ways that appeal to you. So if it's faith-based, if it's
Mm-hmm.
your spirituality,
Mm-hmm.
if it's through your friends, being able to
Mm-hmm.
speak with them. I think these are all little ways in which, when we put them together, it's a
Mm-hmm.
kind of a whole piece of how we're helping ourselves out in life. So there are many
Mm-hmm.
ways. Community, access. There's lots of great community-led groups
Mm-hmm.
or support groups that are out there. If accessibility is an issue,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of groups online. You just want to make sure that they're moderated properly and secure.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I really think that that's important. Orienting towards your pleasure, because essentially you want to
Mm-hmm.
be able to enjoy, and that's what's going
Yeah.
to make us feel joyful, and it's going to make
Yeah.
us feel grounded and safe. So if there are
Mm-hmm.
things that that you like to do, I would
Mm-hmm.
suggest that can actually be a part of your wellness
Mm-hmm.
plan, is to
Mm-hmm.
do that more often. Do
Mm-hmm.
it regularly, maybe build a
Yeah.
ritual around that so that there's
Mm-hmm.
consistency that you have to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And nature, I think this is so important, is our relationship with this earth. That's huge.
Yeah.
So is there a way that we can connect with that? Is that,
Mm-hmm.
getting ourselves outside,
Mm-hmm.
doing something like that?
Mm-hmm.
Music. I think there's a whole bunch of ways that we
Mm-hmm.
can support ourselves in terms of in terms of orienting towards our pleasure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. For sure. And what I really hear you talking about is making time for wellness and joy in our life. And some of those things are things that we might not associate as part of a wellness practice, like reading or listening to music. They might just be things that we're doing anyway. And it sounds like there's some benefit from um, being intentional and making some intentional time to really spend time with ourselves and to spend time with things that bring us joy. And
Mhm.
it can be a mix of things. Some things might be challenging, like doing a workbook or being reflective about our emotions, and some things might be more fun, but having a balance of different things still helps with the process of healing and being on a wellness journey.
I think so. I think that's kind of what it's about, is that we really want to be orienting towards our pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, pleasure, you know, there's even, you know, so when we think of like Adrienne Marie Brown comes to mind, and
Mm-hmm.
pleasure activism. But
Mm-hmm.
the whole point in that is that we're coming to a place that makes us feel balanced, that makes us feel whole,
Mm-hmm.
that starts to ignite our felt sense of security and safety.
Mm-hmm.
And when we have support, we can
Mm-hmm.
actually start actualizing transition. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, absolutely. Orienting towards things that are pleasurable and that we
Mm-hmm.
enjoy is a
Mm-hmm.
great way of starting to engage some embodied resilience around
Mm-hmm.
the work that's going to
Mm-hmm.
support you through the more challenging times. And
Mm-hmm.
especially if, you know, you can really get some connection in there. For
Mm-hmm.
some people, though, that may be the issue, is the
Mm-hmm.
connection creates, you know, some triggers. And
Mm-hmm.
that's fine. There are other ways to orient towards your pleasure as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. We're going to wrap up, but I'm curious from you if there are any books that you personally really love and I think are great books that you maybe want to share. Sorry, my fire alarm is going off, but
Oh, no.
we will ignore it and it will be handled.
Okay. You know, there's this fabulous book that I really, really like that I was introduced to, and I think it's really aligned with the things that I'm interested in my practice, and also that I think would speak to a lot of people, especially if they're, you know, going through issues that are relating to racialized oppression specifically. And that's My Grandmother's Hands.
My Grandmother's Hands. Okay.
Yeah, My Grandmother's Hands. That's by Resmaa Menakem. And yeah, it's a great book. It has even, you know, at the end of the chapters, they provide you with some practical tools right in there. And I think that's really important as well, is having some self-reflective tools. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. 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 Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. This has been so super useful, and I feel like I'm glad that we can have conversation about some of these initial moments. I feel like sometimes what gets in the way, I know for me in the past, what has gotten in the way is just not knowing where to start and what to do and how to even start the conversation and what the steps would be. So thank you for taking some time this evening to provide some clarity and provide some directional steps that folks can reference back to.
Of course. Well, thank you too for your time. It was nice to meet you finally.
Nice to meet you. I'm so excited, and I hope that we can continue to connect in the future.
Absolutely.
Okay. Have a wonderful evening, Camille.
You too. Bye.
Okay. Bye.